It's starting to look like COVID-19 is worse than we thought. It's not about just the mortality. That's bad, of course. But it's about the lifelong impacts that seem to be afflicting not just some people, not just people who caught it in a very serious way, but even asymptomatic people. Hello, everyone. Dr. Chris Martenson here on July 14th, 2020. Happy 7/14, everybody. This is your update on SARS-CoV-2, and let's go right to the numbers. Hey, we're over 13 million cases now. Yep, and 577,000 deaths total. And as we look at those numbers now across the world, we have a chart that looks something like this. See the total cases here at 13,229,000. And look at the shape of this curve. It's a little bit steeper on this end down here than it is just even back here. So it looks like it's accelerating a little bit, and we can detect that somewhat. I charted these numbers here by looking at how many days did it take to get to the next 1 million cases. It took 71 days to get to the first 1 million cases. That was from January 21st when this all started getting tracked and recorded officially to the first million cases there just in early April. Then it only took 13 days to get to the next million, 13 days, 11 days to the next million, 11 days to the next million, then 9 and 9 and 7 and 7 and 6 and 6, and then 5 and 4. Only 4 days to go from 12 to 13 million. So I think we can clearly see what the trajectory is here. This disease is actually spreading across the globe faster and faster at this point by the numbers. Of course, deaths aren't nearly as bad as they once were back here in April worldwide, but I think we can plainly see there is a upward trajectory here to deaths lately. And this is with much better treatments over here than we had back here. This is the bad old days of ventilators back here. That's bad stuff. Putting people on vents with 20% survival rates. Just atrocious. Over here on this side, we do have things that we can start to use now. We've got the Math Plus protocol over here. And we've got things like hydroxychloroquine that's been proven to work if you get it in early enough. We've got ivermectin, which I'm going to show you about today. We've got steroid therapies. We've got a variety of things that we know about now that can actually work. And those are going to get better. And that gives me hope in this story. And eventually, maybe, who knows, someday we might get a vaccine that actually works. But we're going to talk about the non-persistence of antibodies, which is a big hit to that. So, hey, thank you everybody who's been listening throughout this series. Maybe you're new, maybe you've been listening to every one of these, but for those of you who are still clinging on to this story, still following COVID-19, letting your attention stay focused here, you are the honey badgers in this story. You are also persistent and the ones who are able to continue to ingest data and information and try and make sense of it so that you can, keep yourself safe, your loved ones safe, maybe the people around you, if you can help educate them. Because in my country, the United States, I hate to say this, a lot of people are going to need a lot of educating and re-educating and things like that, because we got some bad info going on here. All right. I want to talk about getting COVID a second time. That was the title and the subject of last time's video update. And some of you said, hey, that case that you put forward, some of you loved it and said that really humanized it, helped make it come home, the Adam and Sherry story. The Hagees. Some of you said, hey, she didn't get tested, so how do we know that she had it? Well, look, first off, the symptomology for COVID is actually really pretty crisp around this stuff. How long it lasts, how hard it hits, which organs it hits, just how run down everybody seems to be from this. I mean, not just run down, but I mean run down for weeks and weeks. But I want to take you through some of the logic here, which is why I'm using cases like Adam and Sherry's. And now we've got a couple others where we actually have confirmed, tested cases we can talk about. But here's why, with something like a pandemic, something like a novel coronavirus, you have to be able to operate on incomplete information, which is what I was doing, of course, pulling early cases of secondary infections because we don't have a lot of good data. And here's part of the reason. Let's imagine that it takes 4 months for somebody's antibodies to clear away. You get diagnosed with this thing, you recover, and then it takes 3-4 months before you can catch it again, right? It just takes a little bit of time. So 4 months ago from when this chart is drawn up through, so let's take it back this is from July 13th here. Let's go back and we find out that 4 months earlier, so March 13th to April 13th to May 13th to June 13th to July 13th, that's 4 months. There were only 72,595 cured people in the world. All right. And so in order to have shown up on this chart, you would have had to have been tested, confirmed COVID positive, and then also confirmed COVID cleared, right? So that's how people are showing up on this chart. But that isn't a huge pool of people who are tested that we can draw upon. So let's use some assumptions here. Let's imagine that it's 4 months from time of recovery to when you're at risk again. And let's imagine using the Spain data that there's about a 5% chance of you getting infected at all. Let's imagine that out of these 72,595 recovered people, half of them remain immune. Hey, use whatever numbers you feel comfortable with. I'm just throwing some numbers out just to illustrate a point here. These aren't actual numbers that I don't know if it's a 5% chance of getting infected. I don't know if you 50% remain immune. And I don't know if you have a 50% odds of actually being retested if you come down sick again. I don't know what those are. But if you use these assumptions, the math says that barely 1,000 people, just over 900 people worldwide would qualify as people that we would be able to detect as legit, certified, tested once, cleared once, tested again, sick again, right? That's not a very big pool of people to draw upon, but despite that, we can find people who fit that bill. So for instance, here's an article that came out on July 12th. This was in Vox. It says, my patient caught COVID-19 twice. So long to herd immunity hopes. Wait, I can catch COVID twice. My 50-year-old patient asked in disbelief. It was the beginning of July, and he had just tested positive for SARS-CoV-2 for a second time, 3 months after a previous infection. While there's still much we don't understand about immunity to this new illness, a small but growing number of cases like his suggests the answer is yes. Yes, you can catch it again. A small but growing number of cases. And of course, it's going to be a small number of cases like his for these reasons right here. It can't be that large. So we have to go with the data we've got and infer from there. This is kind of interesting. Also conforming with the story we told about Adam and Sherry, this doctor is writing, hey, COVID-19 may also be much worse the second time around. During his first infection, my patient experienced a mild cough and sore throat. His second infection, in contrast, was marked by high fever, shortness of breath, and hypoxia, resulting in multiple trips to the hospital. All right. So that is just no good. I'm going to turn my speaker off there in case that happens again. Thanks for those updates, Samsung. So here's a confirmed case out of really, again, there can't really be that many confirmed cases, but here's a person who tested once, cleared, tested and cleared, caught it a second time. So this seems like a pretty solid case, but you can find lots of cases like this. I won't read this whole thing out to you. You can freeze frame this or just follow this link down here. But this is from a woman who's writing in on a Reddit thread. They were tested positive in her family. And so first time around, they had a really tough run of this stuff, right? So way back here in March, she started showing symptoms of fever, a debilitating cough, bronchitis, severe fatigue, body aches, congestion, loss of smell, changed taste, fainting. That's, to me, there's plenty of markers in here. I say, yeah, loss of smell, this persistent cough. You had COVID the first time around, but it was the fatigue, right? And they say it didn't go away completely until 5/5/20. So, a couple of months, 6 weeks or so, but really a long run of it. My husband had severe fatigue, some mild coughing and body ache starting on 3:30. Daughter had tachycardia, moderate fatigue, stuff like that, right? So they go ahead and it clears out. And by the way, they were tested negative for influenza A and B, so it wasn't that. So what could it be? COVID would be a pretty good guess. But check this out. On 6/25, my husband came home from work. He's a paramedic, so that's a high-risk occupation, with what he thought was a light cold, some congestion, sneezing, a little coughing. His work, out of an overabundance of caution, had him swab tested because he had worked with a COVID-positive patient a few days before. While we were waiting for these results, I had to call out of work for a bad cough as well on 6/26. My daughter began to have what we thought was just a prolonged migraine with nausea, but without aura, also on 6/26, and my husband's results came back positive on 6/29. At this point, I started to have 100.2 fever, and my daughter became severely congested, fatigued, achy, and we swab tested. Results came back positive on 7/2. And as of 7/4, I also have become congested, body aches, some loss of smell and taste, fainting. The fatigue is awful. So she's saying, I'm not writing any of this to claim some sort of special status. If you don't believe me, that's fine. I will say that we're finding out more and more about this illness all the time. For example, we now know that a European strain made its way across the pond to the U.S. that is different from the one that was in Asia. And my experience fits with having it twice along with my family. Another story. This person says they are likely reinfected. 2.5 months in recovery, almost all symptoms coming to a finish. Diagnosed positive at the ER and then tested negative for antibodies 7 weeks later. Check that out. Negative for antibodies 7 weeks later. Let's just remember all of that because we're going to be talking about that in just a second. All right, that's really important information. So his coworker needed help driving, and so I evaluated low risk. It was just him and me in the car. I was in the car with him, no AC, for about 3 hours. Then 6 hours later, my eyes are bright red, streaming tears, just like in the first week of my COVID battle. Running nose too, which I hadn't had since the first 2 weeks. Headache, brain fog, sore throat, experiencing now chest pressure and cough. This is a fucking nightmare, and all long-termers need to be warned. Do not listen to the government or a news source. We will get it again, maybe not as bad, but we're not immune. Be careful. I am so defeated. I don't want to do this anymore. It's horrible. All right. This is really important information, and I really want you to be able to take this in because this is a very common experience. I'm finding more and more and more examples like this. So the early signal says if your antibodies are going away and you had it the first time, you possibly can get it a second time. We don't know how many. We don't know, is this everybody? Is it just a few people? We just don't know. But a new study came out here in the UK. So we already had this data. I presented this 3 months ago now from China. China had already run this data and said the same stuff. But somehow, when the UK does it, we pay a little bit more attention. Not we, I mean, but sort of the collective we in the United States and the UK. They don't pay attention to any of those other foreign studies. But I do, and we already knew this, but it's here being reconfirmed in a UK study, which is that coronavirus antibodies can start to fade away within weeks, according to a new study which puts a nail in the coffin in the idea of herd immunity. Antibodies to the coronavirus may disappear within months for many patients, according to a major new UK study, which found that their presence peaked 3 weeks after symptoms appeared, before gradually fading away. That's it. They peaked 3 weeks after symptoms. That's not good. For some patients, no antibodies were detected after just a few months, throwing doubt on hopes for a long-lasting vaccine. The study, which was carried out by scientists at King's College London and first reported by The Guardian, puts another nail in the coffin of the dangerous concept of herd immunity, one of its authors said. All right, this is bad news because it means that, the way you get one of the ways you get long-lasting immunity, and one of the chief ways we know about is, of course, through developing antibodies to the invading pathogen that in question, right? So your body develops antibodies. They kick around. If your body has a long-lasting immunity, again, you can get challenged by something and remain immune the rest of your life. That happened with the smallpox vaccine. It can happen with a polio vaccine. It does happen with mumps, all sorts of things, right? But for coronaviruses, we know this with the common cold. It goes away quickly. So we were hoping that wasn't going to be the case with this coronavirus because it hits so hard. Maybe somehow what happens is, the antibodies will stick around. But the answer is not so much. They peak within 3 weeks, and then they seem to go away. And for some people, they go away entirely. So another nail in the coffin of this idea of herd immunity, because to get herd immunity, you need a bunch of people who are immune in the herd. And if people's antibodies are going away and they no longer have immune responses, then herd immunity won't happen. So not good news on that front. This also just came out very recently. It came out on 7/13, so that's yesterday. Says here in Newsweek, scans reveal heart damage in over half of COVID-19 patients in study. Oh no, heart damage. So I was hoping when I read this headline that this would be, okay, the most severely ill. These are people who are on ventilators. They come out with all sorts of problems. Maybe heart damage is part of it. No such luck. This is from that article. It says here, a study on heart scans of COVID-19 patients has revealed more than half had some form of damage. The study involved 1,216 patients, of whom 813 had been diagnosed with COVID-19, so just 813 diagnosed. And a lot of people are presumptive because of their symptom set, just like Adam and Sherry Hagee, their story. When you see certain symptom sets, you can be pretty certain they had it. So this is what they did in this study: 1,216, 813 diagnosed for sure. 298 were deemed probable cases. Due to the design of the study, the remaining 105 were assumed to have COVID-19, the co-authors told Newsweek. So three groups: 813 diagnosed, 298 deemed probable, 105 assumed to have COVID-19. Kind of like I assumed that Sherry Hagee had COVID because of the symptom set. The participants were from 69 countries across 6 continents. I like this because what we're doing here is we're pulling from all sorts of different places. 69 countries, 6 continents. So that's a pretty big cohort to look at. They each had an echocardiogram, a type of ultrasound scan for the heart, between April 3rd and 20th. Of the total 1,216 patients, 667, that's 55%, had abnormalities in their scan, and 1 in 7 participants had what researchers described as severe abnormalities, according to the paper published in the European Heart Journal Cardiovascular Imaging. On average, the participants were age 62, 70% were male, 60% of the scans were performed in a critical care setting, such as an ICU or emergency room, while the others were carried out in general medicine settings. Cardiology, respiratory, or COVID-19 wards, some of the 54% of the patients had severe COVID-19. So, as we like to do, let's go take a look at the actual data from that study. Here are the results, and again, all the links are always provided, and they're provided here. Also down below, clickable links. These just are the ones that give you the visual reference, but clickable links are found down below in the descriptions that always accompany these videos. So I make it easy for you to follow and check my work, of course, because that's part of this whole thing. So here we see the ages here, and these are abnormal scans. This is the column for abnormal scans here, and then normal scans are here. So what I want you to notice here is COVID-19 status is right here. So here are the confirmed. Out of 813 confirmed cases, which was 73% of the overall number of 1,216, 68% of the confirmed cases had abnormal scans. Those with a high probability of having COVID was just 32% had abnormal scans, and those with evidence of pneumonia, 20% had abnormal scans. More interestingly to me is this idea of symptom severity. So those with let's start at the bottom. Those with severe symptomology, 54% of the total group here, 52% of them had abnormal scans. Those with moderate COVID, 32% had abnormal scans. Those with mild COVID, still 15% had a abnormal scan. So yeah, this is really, really not a good sign that if you have mild COVID, you can still have a 1 in 7 chance of ending up with an abnormal scan, even if it's mild. All right, so hold on to that idea of mild, because we're going to trend into an area now of talking about what it means to be even asymptomatic in this story. Remember the Diamond Princess cruise ship? People held it up in a couple of different ways. One, to say, wow, the overall mortality of this thing is actually quite low because we had 712 people infected and only whatever it was. I forget how many. I don't know what the final number was. I think it was 13 people died. Might have been 14. I forget. But at any rate, the overall mortality was not that high. And this was an older cohort of people by age. So, hey, maybe it's not that bad of a disease. I get that. On the other hand, we can now look at this in a different way. And we see that coronavirus wrong pen, get the yellow pen. Coronavirus damages lungs of asymptomatic patients, too, medical examiner says. So this comes from June 29th. A medical examiner in Florida has warned that individuals who contract the novel coronavirus and are asymptomatic still appear to have lung damage. Now, this is something we've been tracking for a long time. We talked about those divers that the German doctor had scanned and said, oh my gosh, these people may have permanent lung damage, formerly healthy people. And that was, I forget, probably back in April when we were reporting that. Continuing here, quote, "My gosh, I really don't know how to say it without being gruesome. COVID, just destroys the lungs." Dr. John Thogmartin, the medical examiner for Pinellas in Pasco County, said, so let me just say that. Thogmartin cited his own experience doing autopsies and a study published earlier this month by Scripps Research, a nonprofit medical research facility. That analysis suggested that up to 45% of those infected with the novel coronavirus were asymptomatic, while also noting that these individuals appeared to suffer lung damage. Hold on. 45% of those infected with the novel coronavirus are asymptomatic. So about half are showing no symptoms, but noting that these individuals appeared to suffer lung damage still. When the person dies, you can find lungs that don't look and feel like lungs anymore. Continuing on, the Scripps research study said that the medical examiner referenced study that the medical examiner referenced explained that CT scans conducted on asymptomatic individuals from the Diamond Princess cruise ship appeared to show significant subclinical lung abnormalities, raising the possibility of SARS-CoV-2 infection impacting lung function that might not be immediately apparent. However, further research is needed to confirm this, right? Of course, but this is so they ran these CT scans on asymptomatic individuals from the Diamond Princess cruise ship. These are people who tested positive for COVID, but they said, I feel fine. Everything feels fine. One of the crazy hallmarks of this disease is that even people whose lungs are all but destroyed and have blood sats in the 80s, sometimes in the 70s, will be sitting there in the ER just telling the doc they feel fine. Their lips are blue. Their oxygen sats say they should be actually passed out. It's a strange hallmark of this disease that people can feel fine even though their body is immensely damaged. And in this case, with these asymptomatic people, what we're learning is that they were completely asymptomatic, no fever, no cough, no shortness of breath, no reports of myalgia, tiredness, none of that. And still, when they did CT scans on them, they found that quite a number of them showed significant abnormalities in their lungs. Okay, and they were subclinical abnormalities, meaning you wouldn't show up for this, but still they're detectable as an impairment of the lung in some way, shape, or form. Okay, so that's not the good news in this story. The better news in this story is that we are finding things that actually do work more and more over time. So let me make this a little bigger again. This comes to us. I said I was going to talk about ivermectin, and by the way, there's a ton of studies on ivermectin that are still that are underway. Lots of them, probably 9 or 10, and we won't get the data from those for a while. So I can't wait for that data. So we have kind of incomplete data right now, fairly low numbered studies. In fact, of the studies running, many of them are 50 patients, 80 patients, 120 patients, kind of low powered studies. So I wish we had big, giant, fat studies running on this, because the data that's come out of them so far says we really ought to be hitting ivermectin hard and giving it, seeing how it works. All right, U.S. trial of ivermectin cuts coronavirus mortality by 40%. So that's a pretty big finding right there. The study was published in medRxiv, so that means it's a preprint, has not been peer-reviewed yet, so always remember that. And was led by Dr. Jean-Jacques Rajter, a physician at Broward Health Medical Center. The study assessed 280 coronavirus patients over the age of 18, with 173 being treated with the drug and 107 having standard care for the virus. The study found that overall mortality in those who took the treatment was 15% compared to those who did not take it, who had a 25% mortality rate. This would equate to a 40% drop overall. Okay, 15% is still not super awesome, but it's let me get that finally. 15% not awesome, but way better than the recovery trial out of the UK with their horrifying 28 to 40% mortality rates. But still, it did have a pretty big drop between what they called standard of care here, 40% drop. The most notable result in the study showed that the drug had a significant effect on the very high-risk group of COVID-19 patients suffering from severe pulmonary disease. Of the patients who did not receive ivermectin, 81% died, while only 39% died when receiving the treatment, improving their survival odds by just over 50%. Okay, so this is slightly different. This is in the total study, This data, what we just talked about here, this comes from a cohort of people in the study who are very high risk COVID patients. So either they had a lot of comorbidities, or their lung disease was super advanced, or they were just in really bad shape. So if you're in really bad shape, it increases your survival odds by just over 50%, which is a great finding. Geez, if remdesivir had anything half that good, it's all you'd hear about all day long on CNN and elsewhere, right? It'd be crazy but ivermectin is this off-patent compound that nobody can make a ton of money on. So you're not going to hear much about it except places like this channel. Ivermectin, developed in the 70s as a new class of drug to treat parasitic infections, initially used as in veterinary medicine before being used to treat onchocerciasis and lymphatic filariasis. I don't even know what that is. 3.7 billion doses have been given, and guess what? It's got a great safety profile. What does it look like? Well, if you have horses, you know what this stuff is. This is what ivermectin paste looks like. It has all sorts of different sort of brand names. It comes apple flavored. I like the apple flavored personally. That's good stuff. It's a very common substance out there. As well, we saw this study. I think where'd this come out of? I forget. Was this Bangladesh? I forget exactly where this one came from. But this came out in June. We saw this one. We reported on it a while back. They divided patients into two groups. A, which was just 60 patients, had ivermectin, 200 micrograms per kilogram single dose. And they gave them doxycycline as well, 100 milligrams twice a day for 10 days. So, this is very similar to Dr. Tariq Alam's successful hospital-approved protocol at the Bangladesh Medical College. Group B, which was just 56 patients, had hydroxychloroquine, 400 mg first day, then 200 mg twice a day for 9 days, plus azithromycin 500 mg for 5 days. So they're comparing these two groups, A and B. So A gets ivermectin and doxycycline, and B gets hydroxychloroquine plus azithromycin. All right. And also they gave, standard care stuff. All right, moving on. The results, much like the results from Dr. Rochester at Broward County, which we just talked about, and Dr. Tariq Alam, Bangladesh Medical College, the results were quite positive. Group A, the ivermectin group experienced a 100% recovery rate with a mean symptomatic recovery duration of 5.93 days, negative PCR for a test for a viral load at 8.93 days. Group B results, hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin was 96.36%. Survival and 6.99 days and 9.33 days, respectively. So the recovery was a little faster on ivermectin, and the PCR also cleared up faster. So one of the I have a problem with this study, which was they also excluded a bunch of people up front. I think out of the entire study cohort, they excluded 43 people because they had comorbidities that they thought might would not work well with this study. But if you chuck all the people out with comorbidities, you're chucking out a big chunk of the patient population. Of course, I think you're going to get slightly better results, but still, no question about it, these are pretty favorable results, especially this, noting the recovery duration of 5.93 days. That's good for any patient population, of course. So that looks pretty good. And as well, we have one more study to say ivermectin works. This is MedRxiv. So again, a preprint says not been peer-reviewed. We know that, right? So this is effectiveness of ivermectin as add-on therapy in COVID-19 management. It's a pilot trial. And what did they find? The methods here, very small studies. Again, we need big, more well-powered studies, obviously. But they said here 16 patients received a single dose of ivermectin at 200 micrograms per kilogram on admission day as add-on therapy to HCQ and azithromycin. So it's everything. It's a big plus. It's throw everything at it. HCQ, azithromycin, plus ivermectin. And they were compared with 71 controls that received just the hydroxychloroquine and AZT. And they matched them in age, gender, clinical features, comorbidity, stuff like that. The primary outcome they were looking for was percentage of cured patients defined as symptoms free to be discharged from the hospital in 2 consecutive negative PCR tests from no swabs. And so that's what they looked for. What are the results here? of 87 patients included in the study, the mean age of patients in the ivermectin group was similar to controls, so they were both around 45 years of age there. Majority of patients in both groups were male, but statistically not significant. Okay. All the patients of the IVM group were cured compared with the controls. 16 versus 69. So 100% versus 97.2%. So that all looks pretty good right there. And 2 patients died in the controls. All right. So again, the mean time to stay in the hospital significantly lower, and no adverse events were observed. Remember, no adverse events because hydroxychloroquine ain't dangerous. Neither is ivermectin. So I like this part. Conclusions: add-on use of IVM to HCQ and AZT had better effectiveness, shorter hospital stay, relatively safe compared with controls. However, a larger prospective study with longer follow-up may be needed to validate these results. All right. So, if we look at all of these different things, there's pretty good results showing up for ivermectin. So here's my summary for ivermectin. 1, you get shorter hospital stays. That seems to be part of it. That's good. It lowers mortality. That's great. You seem to get faster viral shedding. That's a key hallmark of how you get better faster. No real downside. It has a ridiculously good safety profile. So why not? Therefore, there's nothing but upside to it. So I would definitely say this should be part of the standard care frontline therapy. No question about it. All right, now I want to talk about how we summarize all of this, because we've been going on and on about this for a long time. And I tell you all the time, I don't want to catch COVID-19. I don't want anything to do with it. I don't know how bad it's going to be. I don't like the idea that there's long-lasting damage. I don't like the fact that immunity doesn't seem to last. I don't have 6 weeks to spend in bed right now. I don't want to spend 6 weeks in bed 2 times a year or 3 times or whatever's going on. I don't want any of that. But I think that same awareness hasn't really dawned yet on the larger population, certainly not in the United States. So let's ask where all of this is heading. First, asymptomatic doesn't mean okay. All right. So people can say they feel fine, but they actually are receiving some sort of lung damage, possibly heart damage. Well, not possibly, but also proven now heart damage, things like that. So that's not really a good thing. And so when we look at this long-lasting damage that certainly happens to people who are COVID mild, serious, or severe, or even asymptomatic. And of course, I would bet the asymptomatic people are better off than the people who are more serious. I get that. But it says that this long-lasting damage can happen even to asymptomatic people. So where this is all heading is this idea of long-lasting damage, which we now know includes long-lasting damage to the brain. We presented that a couple weeks ago. To the lungs, we've presented that several times, including today. Kidneys, haven't presented that in a while, but there are people on dialysis who've come out of COVID recovery, so-called, and to the heart. There's probably other things. We're receiving early reports, and we're going to be talking about this in the future, that the male testes seem to get really walloped by this. And how do I put this delicately? They shrink for some people big time. So a lot of ACE2 receptors down there as well in the testes. So I think that this is an incomplete list, but let's just say if you tell me my brain, lungs, heart, and kidneys are possibly going to be suffering long-lasting damage, I'm checking out. I'm peace out. I don't want any part of that particular illness. And let's imagine that you could get it a second time. This seems to be possible now. So you're sick with COVID, and then you get sick again. And that's just horrifying thought. But what if that's true, who can say that it won't happen once, twice, a third time, or over and over again, each time sort of walloping your body harder and harder? I want no part of that. And as well, everybody's kind of hoping for this idea of herd immunity, and maybe it's going to happen. I don't know. We don't have enough data yet. But so far, what we're finding is, no herd immunity is where we started in this story. Everybody could infect everybody else, and that's fine. But eventually, we were hoping where we're going to get to is you have all these people in green here who are immune. And they're immune because they've had the disease, they recovered from it, and now they have circulating antibodies. And so now they are actually immune. But what happens if these people who were green all of a sudden go back to being blue again? And that means that herd immunity is actually lost in this story. And that's where I think we're actually heading, is towards awareness of that. So that's where all of this heads, is actually in awareness. And my question is this: what happens when people figure out that SARS-CoV-2 is a nasty disease with long-lasting damage to many organ systems that some, many, a few, all, I don't know the answer to this yet, can catch over and over again, and no silver bullet vaccine is coming along because antibodies are not persistent. What happens when that becomes general knowledge rather than what's being promoted out there, which is the idea that, hey, the mortality's not all that high. Hey, most people are asymptomatic. Hey, most people, it's a nothing disease. Well, as we're finding out, it's not a nothing disease. It has a pretty big impact. So my hypothesis in all this is that the U.S. in particular has a really tough fall and winter coming. California just orders a shutdown of bars and indoor dining because coronavirus cases are surging again. L.A. is on verge of shutting down again. The mayor warns there. In Riverside, a gym defies Governor Newsom's order to close. We're not closing, right? Because that's how we roll in America, right? And it's become a real culture war out there right now. I like this mask, no mesh. Or hose masks, right? No mesh. No lace masks, no painty masks, no dick noses. That means your nose needs to be inside your mask. We can't believe we had to make this sign. Please be a good human. So that battle is raging right now. So the conclusion for today is that the time between each new 1 million cases, it continues to shrink. I did it again. How do I keep forgetting to do this? Let me update that. This is for July 14th. Okay, if you're taking a snapshot, take it now, please. All right. Yes, people can catch SARS-CoV-2 a second time. This is proven and confirmed in today's episode with an actual case where the tests were performed, which means that maybe third or fourth or more times, we don't know. But that's certainly a horrifying thought. The second round seems to be every bit as bad as the first time. Maybe it's worse. We don't know yet if that's because it includes antibody-dependent enhancement, the ADE pathway. We don't know if that's just because your body's weakened. We don't know. Don't know yet. But it's the second round. It's not. The other hope would be that the second round is mild because you had it, but you caught it again, but it's not that bad because your body knows how to fight it. That's not what's happening here. Long-lasting damage is now a known feature, even among so-called asymptomatic people. Affected organs include heart, lungs, kidneys, and brain. I'm going to let me see if I can just correct that right there. Yeah. All right. But Ivermectin works, and I think so does hydroxychloroquine at this point in time, and so do other things in the Math Plus protocol, and we're learning more and more. So treatments are coming along, but the most important thing is that you are as healthy as you can possibly be and that you can fight this off as best you can. When awareness of all these facts finally penetrates the consumer mindset, I'm using that term very carefully, long-lasting changes will cement themselves. I think the economic damage is going to be quite severe. In the United States economy, which is 70% service economy, a lot of service jobs are not going to do well if people begin to really self-isolate and continue to keep the distance and do all of that because, well, we are legitimately concerned about getting long-lasting damage to our brain, lungs, kidneys, heart, etc., maybe even testes once we figure this out a little bit further. And of course, you know what? It didn't have to be this way. It didn't. And so my name is Chris Martinson, and I approve of this billboard that I stumbled across. I don't know who put that up, but bless you. That's awesome. Thank you very much for putting this up. And as well, thank you for everybody who is sending in your pictures of yourself wearing the Resilience t-shirts. Here's a new crop that just came in. That's all fantastic looking. Hey, here's another crop that came in. They're really starting to pile in right now. So loving to see, chicken coops, greenery, gardens, a lot of smiling faces, people, just putting in all walks of life, doing what they're doing. And here's another crop that came in. Speaking of crops, look at these awesome plants going on down here. And love seeing the face masks in there as well, obviously. And thank you very much, everybody, for sending these in. Hey, here's another crop that came in. So we had just a bunch coming in. Underwater, love it. Snorkeling, one of my favorite things to do in the world. So I got to tell you, keep it up, people. Plant a garden. You absolutely need to think about where your food's going to be coming from. I'm going to begin advising as well, because it's getting late in the gardening season, for you to build a deep pantry and get yourself ready for some food shortages that may be arriving this fall. Lots of data starting to show up that that's actually going to be a thing. Not shortages like we starve, but I mean key things that healthy foods that are just going to become in short supply because they're getting harder and harder to source. That's part of it. How do you stay safe? My way is to keep my immune system as boosted as I can, on top of course, adequate social distancing and just keeping the heck away from humans right now while we sort all this out as best I can. Quercetin and zinc, two of my go-tos here on a daily basis with D3. Those three things right there are sort of the cornerstone of my personal immune boosting. Selenium, need that as well. Vitamin C, also on a daily basis. I love that. If I do start to feel the scratch in my throat, some of this Gobble Mountain elderberry, organic elderberry syrup, great stuff right there prophylactically at the beginning of that first scratch. If I got sicker than that, N-acetylcysteine to help sop up the free radicals in the oxygen species that get developed when your body is cytokine storming itself. All right, that's all I have for today, except to remind you to resubscribe to this channel if you have to, because people get very helpfully unsubscribed from it all the time. All right, everybody, that is our update for 7/14, and we'll be back very soon and on the 16th with another update. Lots to talk about then. All right, be well. Talk to you then. Bye.
Hi, folks. This is Adam Taggart, Chris's co-founder at Peak Prosperity. To get your own Resilient shirt, simply go to peakprosperity.com/shirts. Each shirt is made of 100% organic cotton and produced in the USA. And when your shirt arrives, please send us a photo of you wearing it if you feel comfortable doing so. We'll add you to our wall of proud Peak Prosperity members who are showing the world that resilience is the way to a better future. Thanks for watching.